Alright, what's going on everyone? Welcome back to the biggest Fire Emblem tier list you've probably ever seen or haven't seen because you're just listening to this and doing something else in the meanwhile. I'm fine either way. This is how I thank my patrons for all of their support, and today we're rounding up the Archanea Special, where people could submit any character from the Archanea games, so FE1, FE3, Mystery of the Emblem, the remakes, Shadow Dragon, and New Mystery of the Emblem, and I would rate them in all the games that the characters appear in, no matter how many of them there are. So the characters I'm rating today, I've been rating them in FE1, FE3, and FE11 before, and now running up with FE12. Slightly different order than usual, just to mix things up, and not at all to match my spreadsheet. Not at all. Nope. FE12 has almost every single character from previous games return. Even characters that were not in the original version of this game. FE3 Book 2, Mystery of the Emblem, The War of Heroes or something, I think it's called. So expect a bunch of people. Expect a bunch of people to be rated. I'm actually surprised it's only 2 rows and then a little bit. Let me read out for you guys who has submitted these wonderful characters so I can thank them once again. Hopefully also remember to edit in the portraits and everything, or the names and everything. So Modi submitted Barsts, Scott submitted Mathis, Danny Doyle submitted Norn, and this is like the only game besides FE11 where Norn is like playable. Patreon Potato, I'll get it right in one try one day. Submitted Sedgar. Curaçao submitted Shima. Paris Spider submitted Nafar and Zayn. Giant Corkscrew submitted Kane, who is in the right spot. Alright, I was just curious. I was like, wait, hold up, are you in the right spot? You're not. Ogma was submitted by Torcharts. Alexis submitted Katarina. Lucas submitted Board. Boots42 submitted Bantu. Omega submitted Tiki. Mani submitted Beck. Jonathan submitted Draug. Daniel submitted Estes. Arkhold submitted both Castor and Ryan, 2 Archer boys. Liberty Ernie submitted Tomas. Pipler submitted Rad. Furon submitted Wolf. Zetetic submitted Wendell. And finally, Samson was submitted by Zelda. There were a couple of other submitted characters for the Archanea Special, but I think they've either all been rated or they just don't appear in FE12. Palakatriastida, Marth, Jagan, Sirius, Abel. Pretty sure they're all on here. Yeah, Linde's on here. Goto isn't playable in FE12. Harden is not playable in FE12 for obvious reasons. Lawrence because explosions, and Minerva is also already on there. So that's why these characters do not appear in this video, even though they were submitted for the Archanea Special. Okay, FE12, let me just go over the metagame in general from what I know about it. It has a massive 4 difficulties. It has normal, and then hard 1 through hard 3. And then I guess hard 4 is also a thing, so that's more like 5. That would be Lunatic Reverse, where all the enemies play as if they have Vantage Plus, so they just always attack first. The highest difficulty I've probably beaten is hard 1. And then the highest difficulty I've played hard 3 and hard 4, but never finished them. I got really far in hard 2 on my Iron Man playthrough. I got to chapter 20 and then I lost because, Chris died, and that's how it goes. So I've been massacred by hard 2 before. I've played up to chapter 6 or so in the higher difficulties, that's about it. This game, when you want it to be hard, it can be really, really, really difficult. And in addition, there's also, even when you're playing the same difficulty, the chances are your experiences will vary wildly because of what you have unlocked. The game has the Rainbow Potion, which is a 77, I believe, use item that works like a tonic from, for example, Fates. In fact, I think Fates is a Rainbow Tonic too. It gives you +2 in every stat that you have. So I think there's some exceptions, but generally it just means you have 2 more speed, so that makes doubling a lot easier. You have 2 more strength, so you do 2 extra damage. 2 more defense makes you take a lot less damage. You can imagine that makes a pretty big difference, because you can give at least one person 1 Rainbow Potion at least every map. Generally even 2 or 3 throughout the entire game and get away with it. That can be a big difference maker. Of course, the difficulty you're playing on also varies a lot, and that can also vary the enemy stats. And in addition to that, there are also some Lunatics mode stat boosters you can buy. I call Lunatics mode stat boosters, but they're actually available for every mode. They are unlocked after beating Lunatic mode once. So there's another way you can patch up weaknesses. If someone is very close to a speed doubling threshold, you can give a speed wing. There's only 3 of each, like 3 speed wings, 3 energy rings. But the point is, if someone's really close to a threshold, you can probably make them reach that through the Rainbow Potion or a Lunatic mode stat booster. Same for durability thresholds. So there's a lot of possibilities to kind of massage stats. You can't really make someone good just with those boosts. You can do it, but it'll be very costly, and it will go at the cost of your auto units being that good. But it's a possibility. In addition, FE12 also has a really free reclass system, especially for males, because after you beat the game once, you are able to reclass all the male units into any class that's available to males to begin with. This is different from Shadow Dragon, where there are 2 male class sets, and they cannot a character that's in one of those class sets cannot go to the other. For example, Sedgar in FE12, in FE11, just to give an example, he has access to classes like General, Hero, Warrior, Berserker, and what's the last one? Sorcerer, I think. Horseman as well, so he can get to those classes, but he cannot get to the male set, which has Paladin, Draco Knight, Sniper, Swordmaster, the one that Jagan and Wendell learn, for example. Yes, I just used pre-promotes as examples, no coincidence there. But in FE12, after you beat the game once, those class sets are merged, and so males can reset like all over the place. It doesn't make a super big difference some of the time, because the weapon ranks can be a bit of a problem. If a character is really good at axes but they have nothing else, if they only have high axe rank, then you can reclass it like between like Draco Knight and Warrior and Berserker, for example, but there's no much of a point to going to Horseman or Paladin, because they just won't have weapon ranks to do anything good in those classes, because Paladins don't have access to axes in this game. So even though a lot of characters have access to like as much as 10 classes, usually only like 3, 4, 5 of them may be viable at the time. Females don't have this pro, but they do have access to, for example, Cavalier and Paladin in this game, or Cavalier and Pegasus Knight in this game when they're unpromoted female units. That's like different from Shadow Dragon. So, for example, Sida and Katria, they can swap between those, whereas in Shadow Dragon, they would have to promote first, and then you can swap between Paladin and Draco Knight, but not until they were promoted. So that's like females got like a slight buff, but males got a huge buff in reclass flexibility. The thing about reclassing is it makes units ratings, I think, really difficult to do, because the reclassing is unlimited. You don't have to use any kind of seals for it. You can just kind of, if you want a character to be a hero for one chapter, and then a sorcerer for the next, and then a horseman for the next, there's no real opportunity cost to it, other than whatever makes, like if they get worse at combat for it. Other than that, they tend to be pretty much the same, and there's no real cost to it. But it also makes it hard to evaluate units in certain classes, because you'd have to try out one character in so many different classes to get a really proper view of how they are at. The other way to do it would be to look at the numbers exactly, but I don't have the numbers memorized, and it takes a lot of experience to really get a feel for what kind of benchmarks you want to reach with units and how you want to go about it. So yeah, I think it'll be tricky to figure out how a unit is based off of theory, and my plan is to rate units based on my experiences with them, my limited experience in Hard 1, and some of the things I've seen, some playthroughs I've watched, some like low-term game playthroughs, done on 0% growth playthrough, of course, that can be used as a bit of a reference. Not exactly, because growths are super important in FE12 as far as I can tell. Like, I know 0% growth is possible, but growth in this game are absurdly high. In Shadow Dragon, they're pretty modest overall, but in this game, it's not an exception to see a character with like 40, 50, or 60% in every relevant stat known to man, at the very least for strength and speed. Most characters have competent growth, and it's just a matter of getting them there. That's also why I think there's a fairly low demand in this game for filler characters that join late. Most characters that join late will have significantly worse stats than characters that join early, especially after they've been trained up. Like I remember, for example, an example that Donna used in her playthroughs, Pala joins in Chapter 3 with bases that are on par with or better than a lot of characters that join as late as like Chapter 14 or 15, for example. Now, Pala's an exceptional unit, like that's why she's like all the way up here in S+ tier. But this is just to illustrate that a lot of these units that you see right here, they'll fall into two categories. They're either early joining, and they can get going if you give them enough training, and for the most part that is something you have to do if you want to play on higher difficulties, because the game is very demanding when it comes to stat benchmarks and weapon benchmarks. This is different to Shadow Dragon, where units, they can usually get by and contribute with just a really powerful forge. If you give a kind of a crappy unit, like, I don't know, Math is a Horse Slayer, he'll be able to one-round enemy Cavaliers. In this game, in New Mystery, I feel like a unit to be like kind of functional as a unit, to be really handy to have around, they need to have like either both forged weaponry and really good stats, or something overkill on their hands to really compensate for how bad they are. So like Lunatics mode stat boosters, or a really powerful forge, or just a really skilled player behind the wheel. That said, Hard 1 is pretty beatable without too much shenanigans like that, and I'm going to be focusing on that difficulty, roughly speaking. But just know that, like, all I'm saying here is your mileage may vary based on these ratings, and this is just a way to weigh their usefulness and kind of have some discussion going. And I plan to just rate them based on my impressions of these units, and then later on maybe I'll adjust it with some kind of review with someone who's more experienced at this game. So without further ado, let's rate some characters. We're like 10 minutes in, so we probably should. So Barst, he joins really early in this game. In Shadow Dragon, Barst really stands out for his base stats over other units. Like, offensively, he is just capable of two-shotting a lot of things. In this game, I didn't really find him very outstanding in his bases, and I just noticed his growth, and I'm like, yeah, okay, those are pretty good. I'm gonna look them up just to make sure I don't say anything stupid or anything more stupid than usual. Like, this is just a good example of how broken growths are in this game. As a fighter, Barst has a 100% HP growth, 70% strength, 60% skill, and then a quote-unquote modest 40% speed. So you can imagine that when Barst is trained, he'll cap a lot of stats. And he joins early enough to where I think you can train him and get away with it. And the question is how much, of your effort and time is it worth into making him this good? Because there's a lot of competition for units who want to train in this game. Barst joins like earlier than probably most units, but not earlier than a lot of units that are, I think, considered good at that kind of stuff. My go-to example for units that are like worth training is always Luke, because he joins in the prologue, so he's around for like a lot of the time. And even like different example, for example, Gordon is not always around in the prologue, but he's around for most of the game, like from chapter 1 onwards, and that's really where you can find a lot of experience. So Barst joins like a little bit after that, but I think he's still trainable enough to where I put him in like C tier at the lowest, I think. Okay, yeah, so I had him in mind like roughly around where like Frost is, and this is also roughly where I put other units that like join around the same time, or like about as trainable. Comparable to Linde, I think is somewhat fine. I feel like Barst would make a fine, like any unit that can use axes will obviously want to slot into either one of the infantry classes. Like Berserker's a pretty good class late game because of its high speed cap and high strength cap, so deal a lot of damage that way. Draco Knight is always good for its flexibility. The stats are like slightly worse, but still super good, I believe. Just a low speed cap late game, so generally I think Berserker and Draco Knight are good classes for him late in the game, and I don't really see a reason to change him ever from like the axe path. He does have a D rank and axes at base, which is, you would like C, like board, but the axes will probably do for training him up. I didn't really find it super easy to use him like higher difficulties whenever I played those, but for like hard 1, I think this is about where I put him. You could argue he'd be better than Linde. I think Linde is better in like the higher difficulties, where, for example, Nosferatu tanking becomes a lot more relevant, and aura bombing as well. Not taking counters, especially on Lunatic, is really huge. FE12 does not have super broken hand axes, like for example GBA games, so being able to just avoid counters by using a hand axe I don't think is that great, because it just has low innate might. You can forge them to compensate for them. I don't know if Barst is really good candidate for that kind of thing, but I would say Barst is like one of the most average units in the game on the whole thing, when it comes to like growth units, pre-promotes, general units. So this is about where I put him. Math is still terrible in this game, unfortunately. I know that like in the earlier games there was sometimes like a slight bit of hope, salvation for Mathis, but I don't think it really exists in this game. His bases are still obnoxiously terrible, and his growths do not compensate. I want to check that because this is FE12 and growths tend to just get really good somewhere. I mean, he also has 100% HP growth as a Cavalier, which is interesting. He also has a D rank in Lances, but that's not super outstanding or anything. Good enough to get to Rider's Bane at some point, but this game is not as forge dominated as Shadow Dragon. Like I said before, in Shadow Dragon you could probably get away with a unit like this more often on the higher modes without being super good at Fire Emblem, but to use Mathis you gotta be capable of dealing with all those Mathis moments. Like 30% speed growth as a Cavalier is not very good. And again, yeah, you can reclass him to like Mercenary to make him faster, but then you lose the Lance rank. You have to deal with him and him having a base sword rank of E, and that's just terrible and not worth dealing with at all. And his personal base are just awful. Like, I'm just gonna check his personal base to see if they're like zeros all around, just to make sure. Personal bases, yeah, I don't see a single one that's over 3. So man is going F tier. I don't know if I put him like over or below Ubello, but I don't think that anyone's gonna be lying awake and worried if I put him in the wrong place compared to Ubello. The point is he's terrible. Joins at like the similar time as he does in Shadow Dragon, but hasn't learned a thing apparently since then. So Norn, if you played Shadow Dragon at like a higher difficulty, you might not even know who she is. But Norn is only able to join you in Shadow Dragon if you beat the prologue, but you sacrifice like too many units. You sacrifice like 2 units, I think, to get her. But in a new mystery, it just made her exist as a real person, and she joins you at the end of chapter 6, or like around the middle of Chapter 6, like along with Frey with a bunch of reinforcements. And I'm not super impressed by Norn. I don't see any reason to use her compared to the alternatives. Like, if you compare her to someone like Barst, for example, who joins like a little earlier, but I'm pretty sure his bases are better all around, and then Norn also doesn't have access to the middle class sets. So whereas Barst can go Draconite, for example, well, Norn can go Draconite technically if you promote her. What's a class she doesn't have access to? I guess Berserker is one of them. That would be one thing. Not that she wants to go Berserker, but she can't be Horseman, right? Because, you know, she's not a horsewoman. Let me see her personal bases, just to see how hilariously bad they are. Because I don't remember them being particularly good. Yeah, I mean, they're better than Mathis, but it about ends there. Like, compared to Bars, for example, HP is the same, her strength is worse, her skill is much worse. Speed is the same, actually, but Bars also has, like, 3 more defense. And Bars joins a chapter earlier. Just, like, not that Bars is, like, the thing you should compare everyone to, but that doesn't mean much. The one thing that Norn has going for her, I think, is that she uses bows. And I think if you're a bad unit, then using bows is almost better than having access to melee weapons, because you can avoid doing a counter. The Norn stats are so bad that I don't think she really works. And like I said, demand for fillers is pretty low, especially fillers that you have to train first. If she was like a pre-promote with slightly better bases, and she joined a bit later, I think she'd be much better, because you wouldn't have to go through the training arc of using her. You wouldn't have to deal with her terrible strength and inability to survive a hit. Because snipers are actually like pretty good in this game. I think I've elaborated on before that Archanea is pretty kind to snipers overall. Being able to avoid a counterattack when the enemies are this strong, having good bases like the sniper class does, is really nice. But even though Norn has a high bow rank, I don't think she's necessarily one of the better snipers in the game. Because bow rank is one of the few things that snipers almost always have. I'm pretty sure the sniper class itself has a C rank in bows. So if you were to like promote, I don't know, let's just say Nafar to use something different than Bars as an example. If you had Nafar, train him up to be a promoted unit to like level 10, reclass him to Sniper, I think he'd be more useful than Norn. I don't know if Norn is terrible enough for F tier or not. I'm tempted to say she's an E tier, but that might just be because I want to fill the E tier with something. So I'm going to put her in E tier for now, just to have something there. Next up is Sedgar, and Sedgar, I mean, again, really good character in Shadow Dragon, but unfortunately they nerfed both his growth and his availability. So in this game, he joins in chapter 19, I also said 20, which is basically when he joins, but it's technically 19. You recruit him by doing the whole Wolfguard recruit chain. It's a very huge pain in the butt, second only to Xavier, I think is a good way to put it. So not really worth it I mean, even if it was good, it would be hard to say it's worth it. But Sedgar isn't even that good. His personal bases do not stand out compared to anyone else. And neither do his weapon ranks. I'm pretty sure it's like Bibos. Might be C. Let's check though. Actually, I think it's a bit better than that. I might be confusing it with Shadow Dragon. Oh, he has D swords and then Bibos. Bibos is actually pretty good. So you could make him like a sniper or keep him as a horseman, be able to use silver bows. I have a feeling that if you reclass him to sniper, he would be able to use the Parthia. Let's check that though, because that's something that like really bad units can do if you wanted to. No, he's like 15 shots away from Parthia, and I know Macellan, for example, can pull that off because he joins a bit earlier. But Sedgar just 15 shots away from using a good weapon is not very good. And then his stats, I mean, if you look at his stats in a vacuum, you might be like, okay, those are acceptable. Like if he's a sniper, he has like 14 strength, 15 speed, 18 skill, 14 defense, 39 HP is actually pretty respectable. But that's in a vacuum. And then if you like compare it to the enemies at that point in the game, depending on the difficulty, I think he like gets like doubled and one on by almost everything. Like the enemies around him are way stronger than he is. And that's one of the things that makes him so hard to recruit sometimes, is the fact that he is so much weaker, and thus you have to not only make sure that your units don't kill him on a counterattack, but you also have to make sure that when you recruit him, the enemies don't kill him afterwards for being such a traitor. So that's why it's such a big pain to recruit him. I'm pretty sure, I think he's the second to last to be recruited in the chain. You have to like visit the village with Marth to get Roche. Roche talks to Violence, and Violence talks to Wolf, and then Wolf talks to Sedgar. Violence talks to Sedgar, and then Sedgar talks to Wolf. There we go, that's the order. But yeah, they also nerfed his growth. He no longer has the broken over 100% HP and defense growth that he has in Shadow Dragon. He has growths that are good, but kind of on par with the rest of the cast. So I think this is a good enough case for E tier. Now, if you compare a unit like Norn to one like Sedgar, you always get like clashing philosophies. Like, okay, do I prefer a unit that can be trained from the ground up and become something worth doing? Because I'm sure as I put it in E tier, a bunch of people like that were like really good at FE12 went through the save files and showed me and like pulling up their screenshots of Norn killing Harden with maxed out stats all around as a sniper or as a sorcerer or something else that's like not optimal, just to show that Norn can become good. But that's not the point, right? Which I think everyone knows. Norn can become good because her growths are good eventually. It's just, is it worth the amount of effort you put into her? And if you put very little effort into these characters, then I think a unit like Sedgar is much better. Because Sedgar, as terrible as he is, gun to your head, if you were forced to deploy him for 1 chapter, for example, you can deploy him in 20 acts and probably find something for him to do. Danon found something to do for Wolf in his 0% growth playthrough using him. Like, not even memeing around. I'm not sure if he was like the worst statistical unit he could have picked or like one of the better ones, because he does join later in his 0% growth than everyone else. But I think the reason they like put Wolf out there is because he was able to bait certain enemies that wouldn't have attacked him if his stats were better, for example. So that's where a unit like Sedgar can actually come in handy. Whereas if you're playing optimally, a unit like Norn is never really going to do anything. But like I said, if you want a unit that can become good and you think it's worth training them, sacrificing early efficiency for later power, someone like Norn is better. For tier lists, I generally favor a unit that's bad, but at least can be sort of relevant maybe once in a blue moon, over a unit that's always going to go through a huge like low points only to become better. That's up to you personally. I'm pretty sure that most people will agree that Norn is like bad and that Sedgar is very bad. The question is like, how do they compare to each other here? Okay, next up is Shima. One of the only female generals in the series that I can think of. At the very least, like, I can think of like Wendy, for example, as like a female knight, but female generals are pretty rare. One of the reasons I'm not a very big fan of the reclassing system of the DS games when it comes to unit identity is little things like that are lost on units. So I think like the fact that Shima, like the whole character concept she has is very cool. I'm pretty sure she's in Heroes and has some really good art there too. But it kind of gets lost when you can just reclass her to like Joker Knight or Paladin and probably have a better unit on your hands. Shima has notorably better, like, I was gonna say better, but I actually mean terrible stats in this game. Just like an FE3, there's just not much you can do that other units cannot do better. And this is something that gets worse when you have universal reclassing in your game, I think, because one way you can make a unit stand out in a niche, or niche, however you pronounce that, is having a unique class that is actually good. If you have a Wyvern Knight or Draco Knight with really bad stats, but you have a foot unit with really good combat stats, you can have them both do things that are useful to you, and they'll be both very different. Like the Draco Knight might be really good at, getting a side objective or rescue dropping people, and the foot unit can be really good at doing combat. You might need to use the Draco Knight to rescue drop the good combat unit across a bunch of mountains and have him do work over there without the Draco Knight having to get into combat at all. When you take those things away, especially that reclassing, but also the rescue dropping, then a unit like Shima, unless you really like the character Shima, there's just no reason whatsoever to use her, especially that late in the game. Let me check her personal stats. I think there was talk of her like being okay as a sniper. Yeah, okay, she actually has Parthia axes as a sniper. That's pretty funny. Unfortunately, FE12 is not just units that don't get countered by snipers or by 2 range. There are plenty of enemies that have like tomahawks and spears, so this is not a guarantee for success. Enemy dragons on Lunatic also have 2 range as well as 1 range, whereas on the lower difficulties they only have 1 range. That's like both good and bad depending on what you want to do with your units. If you want to counter enemy flying dragons with a sniper, for example, then having 2 range can actually be beneficial. You make them come up to you and make them hit you before you hit them. For someone like Shima, this is bad news because she can't survive anything without like an angelic robe or something. She has like 28 HP and 9 defense as a sniper. Her defense like drops down once you reclass her out of general. Her speed goes way up though, from like 8 to 13, for example, from general to sniper. But I don't believe that 13 is enough to avoid getting doubled. I'm pretty sure that even on lower difficulties, dragons hover around like 17 to 18 speed at the very least in the mid-game arc, and in late game like dragons are even faster. So Shima's gonna need a lot of help there. And this is just like me like grasping for straws to make Shima look something useful. I'm pretty sure I would put her in like F tier, maybe E tier. I also heard talk of like later I'm gonna get to Bantu, who I think is like unarguably the worst unit in this game. And some people wanted me to do like this, which I think I will just do that now. Like just put these units in E tier and put Bantu in F tier all on his own. But there's not much value in like, I think the difference between like S tier and A tier and B tier, for example, is much bigger in value and what people think is important for rating units. But I think the units in here, it's like, okay, do you really care what our unit is like D tier, E tier, or F tier? I guess D tier can be looked as like almost redeemable, but not quite. But E tier and F tier, they're both really terrible. Who really cares, right? Next up, we have Nafar. I think Nafar, I mean, the main thing that like makes him stand out among other people is of course sword rank. That's like the one thing that I generally look to when I'm like trying to rate DS Emblem units, is when you can reclass to anything. The most important thing to like determine what they should be is like their ranks, right? So Nafar's just like fairly close to promotion, and he's a mill unit, so he's access to like almost everything. So he's like an level 8 Myrmidon, and with the way his joining chapter works out, with all the thieves and Fina there, he'll probably get a kill or two, unless you can get the Draconites so far up right away that he'll just not have to do anything. I don't remember how many kills he gets in like a properly conducted chapter like that, because it's been a while since I've played it. But he's level 8 at base. Like, he'll probably get made to promotion fairly soon. At least that makes him somewhat salvageable. His growths are good, just like almost anyone's. He's 45% strength and 70% speed, so he's pretty fast. 16 base speed as a Myrmidon is pretty high. If you reclass him to like a Draconite, I think his stats kind of work, but then his weapon ranks are kind of ass. So I don't know if that would be worth it over someone like, if you would ever have space for that over someone like Belfort Light later in the game. I think if you wanted to like take advantage of the sword rank, you almost have to go with something like Horseman or maybe Swordmaster. Swordmaster, unironically, kind of good in these games as well. Not just for a unit with high sword rank, but in general, because the sword rank at base is also C. And that's also the rank you need to use the Worm Slayer. So if you're able to reach a certain speed threshold as a Swordmaster, you can double Wyverns using a Worm Slayer. And you don't even need to forge that much might on a Worm Slayer for it to 2-hit KO Ice Dragons, I believe, or even Flying Dragons. Not sure if it's fine with the double Flying Dragons. They're kind of fast, I believe. But Ice Dragons, Fire Dragons not that fast, so you can double those. You can get a bit of hit on them to have better accuracy, more reliability on fighting them. Of course, Worm Slayer not as great in Lunatic mode because you cannot counter enemy dragons that have 2 range. But on lower difficulties, a pretty good way to deal with a group of dragons, I think. They usually approach you in groups of like 2, 3, 4 at a time. It gets more when the game gets more difficult, or when you get later, or when you fight reinforcements. But generally, I see them in groups of like 3. You'll put like 3 units of yours next to each other in such a way that they can each only be reached by 1. And you just kill them off. So that way your Swordmaster is not under fire from multiple dragons, because they tend not to survive that very much. And the point is, like, Nafar would be okay at doing something like that, I think. Especially because his speed is so high. And his strength is probably good enough. Like, he has 8 base strength, as I remember, on 9 base strength. So I think he'd be able to make it. I think Nafar, it sounds like a cop-out to put him like where I put Ogma, which is like, spoilers, roughly around where Barst is. I feel like he is okay. When I showed my sketched list to some people, they said Nafar should maybe lower a bit. I kind of put him in B- before. I think I'd rather put him a bit lower. Like, his availability is obviously worse, and it takes him a while to get going. I'm just going to put him like where Barst is roughly. He joins a lot later. I'm not sure about Frost. Maybe Frost is better. Frost is like a free physic user. I think that's like really good. Free staff utility. I think it's better than a unit you have to train to be good. Not sure about Elrond. Elrond is like a different, like, you can make Elrond a Swordmaster. It's actually unironically sort of good because of 11th sword gimmicks. But if you want Elrond to just be a good mage, sage, staff body, you can do that as well. But Elrond wouldn't have E rank staff, so it wouldn't even be that much better than Nafar at it, because there's no such thing as like rescue ranks in this game. So I'm tempted to value Nafar more because he joins like a fair bit earlier, like 2 or 3 chapters. I don't know, it's kind of close, but I feel like this is the right tier for Nafar. I don't know why I haven't him B- before. Okay, Zayn. And Zayn, I think, is one of the most interesting units in this whole game, actually. I really enjoy using him, and he's one of the more unique unit characters, and it's probably, funnily enough, because he copies other characters, but he can't reclass, so that still makes him unique. Isn't that funny? So Zayn, like I said about him in his Shadow Dragon and any other game I've rated him in before, a copy of your best unit at the time, generally speaking, when planned well. The main drawback is, of course, he has to transform for a turn, so he has to spend a turn becoming that unit, and he's at low HP, so you have to heal him. And in this game, that's not, like, a thing to easily be, like, neglected. It's the fact that you have to heal him, because healing staffs in this game don't heal all that much, and in addition, they cost some real money if you use them a lot. If you're taking a long time to play through chapters, then you're going to run through healing staffs fast. You heal like 10 HP or like 20 HP max, and Zayn, when you transform into someone with his, like, what is it, like 20 base HP, how much base HP does Zayn have? Like 18. He doesn't have a whole lot. I remember that much. He has 28 HP, yeah. So transform to someone like 40 HP. It's gonna take a while to get that to full, and sometimes units really need to be at full to function. But once he's there, I mean, let's just say you get a second Pala out of him, or a second Staff User. Those are usually the things that transform him to in FE12. Another Pala, another Chris, maybe another Marth. Nah, that doesn't seem very common, but just someone very good. You do need to give him the weapons to make him as good as those other units. If you have like a Forge you're relying on to beat enemies, for example, Dragon Pikes, Forged Dragon Pikes, or Forged Worm Slayers, he doesn't need a copy of those to be as effective as those units, obviously. But the point is, he can use those tools if you have them. You can use trades to make him use them optimally. If you have 3 enemies next to each other, Zayn can easily be one of the units that takes care of them just by virtue of trading. Like Pala kills one, Zayn goes next to her, trades the Worm Slayer or whatever she's using over to himself and uses it, and then someone else goes next to him, etc. He's very useful for that kind of thing. There's never a chapter after Zayn joins where he's bad, so in a way he's kind of like a dancer. I think dancers are more flexible. They can extend movement ranges, for example, which is a very big thing that Zayn cannot really do himself, besides with like a rescue staff, but it's very different. But I think Zayn is, you could argue, he's always the second best character on your roster, right? I don't know if you can argue that he's better than Pala, because on one hand, he can become Pala, so he has all the utility that Pala provides, but then he can also become, for example, your best staff user or your best offensive mage, so someone like Katarina or, I don't know, Etzel or Malaysia or Sirius, whatever you need, he can be those, but Pala can never be those. But on the other hand, he has a turn where he has to transform. He can run out of transformation gauge. I think it lasts like 4 or 5 turns, and then he has to transform again. You have to heal him. Those little drawbacks, I think they still put him below someone like Pala or Chris, or your actual dancer in this game. So with that in mind, I would put Zayn like an A- or A+. He also doesn't have as much availability as those units, and that I think we have to penalize him for that a bit. But I think in this game, because of what I said earlier, the amount of like good fillers you have in this game is pretty low. I think mid-late in the game, most of the units that you are using that are good, especially in the higher difficulties, will be units that you have trained up from the start. So you don't really have much of an opportunity to pad your roster with mid-game pre-promotes. If you compare it to like FE7, for example, or FE8, if you make it through the early game of those, in like Iron Man's, for example, and you get to the mid to late game, you know you're gonna get like, you get like Hawkeye, for example, in FE7, you get like Pent, you get like Veda, you get Harken, so you know you're gonna be fine. So you don't have to train up that many units in the most of the game. You can just pad your roster with those pre-promotes. But FE12, most of the pre-promotes you get later in the game, they can sort of do something depending on the difficulty, but they're never going to be as good as a trained unit, whereas Hawkeye outclasses most of the units you have, even if you've trained them, for example. So that makes, I think, a filler like Zayn really much more powerful in comparison. While we're here, I think I said earlier, I might cut that out, I have no idea, that I would like change some units positionings because I don't want to rate units inaccurately. I think Sida, I might have to drop her a little bit for FE12, because I don't remember why exactly I put her on A-. I think it was a while ago, because I'm pretty sure like P. Vladius submitted her like as one of the first opportunities. Sida is good in this game. Not as good as she's in Shadow Dragon Dash, she's an easy S tier. I don't know if she's A tier either, because her bulk is really lacking in this game. Wing Spear is much less effective, which I already took into account, but I think it's even less effective than I initially thought it was. I think she's okay. Still one of the better units to train long term, but pretty good. The bulk that is missing from her is a bigger struggle for her in this game than I think it is in Shadow Dragon as well. Offensively, she'll miss the benchmark more easily. I think she can still two-shot dragons with a Dragon Spear, for example, or with a Dragon Pike. That's not a big problem, but there are more, for example, enemy warriors, enemy berserkers in this game that she cannot really compete with. And in addition, one thing I do need to say about her is like her prologue utility is absolutely insane. She has, I think, by far the best speed in that army. I don't remember anyone faster than her. Maybe Estes, but you don't often even recruit Estes in the prologue. I think she's the only character that can double enemy thieves in prologue 8, which is very good. And there's not a whole lot she can do like that in the main game, but in prologue I think that kind of stuff weighs more heavily. You can't even reclass in the prologue, which is another reason why I kind of like it. You can actually make use of fly utility of her and use it as an argument as a boon for Sida. The fly utility actually comes in handy every once in a while. In a couple of cramped maps, you can like block one of the reinforcements. In the Kane chapter, for example, I really like that. But I think, for example, Etzel is a bit better. I think Minerva, arguably, I will put her over Minerva just like with the prologue utility as like a bit of a tiebreaker. You can argue she's better than Marth, but I'm not sure about that one. I think Linda, you could argue she should be a bit higher than she is right now, but this is like the main thing that was like standing out as a sore thing here. I think you'd also argue that Etzel's better because of his magical utility. The fact that he has Excalibur and can kill like flying dragons with it, I think might be a bit better than what a B+ rating gives him credit for. I would honestly kind of want to put him in the same tier as Zayn. He just joined a fair bit earlier. Anyway, that's all the super obvious changes I would make right now. There's probably more, but like I said, probably better for a later revision. Kain, interesting unit, I think. I like his prologue utility, even though it's really only one chapter. I'm pretty sure we recruited him at the end of prologue 7, so he only got prologue 8, but he's pretty good there. And then in the main game, he joins in the Great Bridge chapter with Harden, you know, kind of an escape chapter. I think he's alright. I don't think you're going to get him to level 10 in the prologue. I will require leveling him up twice, because I'm pretty sure his base level is 8. So it's a bit too much for him. Let me double check though, because I gotta make sure. Oh, he's level 9 at base actually. So theoretically, he can probably promote it as soon as he wanted to, but there's also other candidates for promotion. The point is he's close to promotion, and at that point in the game, you do want a Draco Knight more than you want like a Cavalier, I feel like, because there's a lot of maps coming up where you have level train penalties. So him having the ability to fly around when he wants to is good. Of course, he's a male, so you can have access to any class, but Draco Knight is generally going to be the best for him. From my experience on lower difficulties, he can be okay at using like a Dragon Pike. It might take a bit to get him to one-shot things, but then again, the same goes for just about any unit that isn't like Chris or Pala. They have more strength. Kain doesn't have that much strength, but I think he has enough to work with for the most part to be viable. His strength growth is like a little bit on the low side at 40% as a Cavalier, and only 11 base, but he can get there. His skill, speed, and luck growth are actually like surprisingly high. They're all 70%. So I think in the long term, you can make Kain good, and it's like slightly better on par with Nafar. He has a base C in swords, which is actually better than Nafar's. Like, actually, let me compare his personal bases to Nafar's. I'm curious now, because he joins like so close together, and his weapon levels are similar. Obviously, he's D-Lances, so he's a bit more flexibility with regards to what he can become. I have a feeling Kain is better. Especially because like Kain is the prologue utility, right? His bases are, I would say, all around better or similar. He's got more, like 2 more HP, 1 less speed, and that's about where the differences end. A little less luck. It's actually faster, growth-wise, if you just look at his personal stats. I'm gonna put him above Navar, I think. I'm gonna put him like, I'd say he's still worse than Frost. I could see him being better than Frost, because Frost is really just staff utility. I just like that free staff utility a lot, but it's kind of late in the game. Lunatic does not have warp, but difficulties below that do. So I wager that Frost, I don't know if you could argue he's better or worse below Lunatic or in Lunatic. That's not really something I can accurately gauge, but that's I think the main selling point. Ogma, kind of like these two units too, like an early game unit that joins early enough, even has the prologue utility that Kain has too, with a little bit more to that. I think he joins at the end of prologue 4. Actually, I think it's a little later than that. I'm trying to think here. You got like the Forest map where Merrick joins. I don't think he's in that one. He's in the later chapter. It doesn't matter. You do have him for a couple prologue chapters. The utility is pretty good. And then he joins in Sirius's map. And I think on higher difficulties, he has a lot of trouble surviving there without some help from someone you rescue in. Like, when I played Lunatic, like once I rescued in General Pala, and she was so fast you could actually double things. That's probably not how everyone tackles it. But generally you need Yumina to rescue someone and to help out to actually get an efficient clear, because Sirius and Ogma enough can handle it on their own. But Ogma get like a lot of work done there regardless, especially on lower difficulties. And it makes him easier to train, right? Because he can get a lot of like speed that way. Sim and prologue. I do think like between him and Draug in the prologue, you have to choose one of them. He's the better choice between them for the prologue utility as well. So there's no casualties there if you do use him there. And I think it's pretty decent overall. Let me check his bases real quick just to see what they're like. They're like on par with Nafar's. A little worse all around, but he joins like significantly earlier. So I'd say he's like about the same when Nafar joins. Maybe Navar's a little better. He has Sea Swords just like Nafar. So he can use like Wormslayer as a base, so no worries there. Probably, I think it's like good B-rank swords around that you actually want to use when they become relevant, but I think the most relevant weapon at that point is like Armor Slayer, Wormslayer, maybe Killing Edge. Swords, I don't think they're the best weapon type in this game, but they're definitely more viable than they are in a lot of games. It's just you can't really dodge tank in a game like this, because the DS avoid formula doesn't really allow it. I'm going to put him like over Nafar for sure. And I'll just like go ahead and put them over Kane too. I think these units are pretty similar, especially again because reclassing exists. I think they are pretty similar. Katarina, I think this is one of the more interesting units in the game because she's a late joiner with actual viable base stats, which is pretty rare in this game. And she's also a female mage, magical oriented unit, so she has access to a couple spells that other units do not, such as Aura and Nosferatu. Basically similar utility to Linde. I am a little biased towards Katarina because she was so important in done on 0% growth run of this game, which was on hard 2. I actually initially wanted to put her, I think around here somewhere, maybe even like over Etzel. Initially I had it like this, Etzel here and Katarina here. I'm kind of tempted to like, do it like this or this. I think Katarina is good enough, kind of like Zayn and Etzel, where you would deploy her every single map she's available for. It's just a matter of weighing how much you care about that availability. But I really do like Nosferatu as a utility. Just the fact that you can survive enemy phases consistently is very, very powerful in the context of a game where enemies can be so powerful and hard to get rid of without risking death to yourself. I like Nosferatu especially for like hard 4 in theory, because you can be... the enemy always attacks first, right? So you attack them on player phase, but they attack first, so you can just heal the damage they do to you right off. Whereas most people on player phase on Lunatic 4 or on hard 4, like a Lunatic reverse, they would like attack you first and you take damage before you can finish them off. But Katarina can sort of negate that, which I think is really cool. But even outside of that context, Nosferatu is really good. But it's really high base magic. If you're using her, you probably want to save some Spirit Dust or use some Spirit Dust for her. Just to maximize her power. I like the ability for magical units to kind of circumvent the high defense of annoying bosses and enemy generals that can be so tough to kill without effective weapons. Especially a Harden himself, because Harden doesn't really face effective damage from anything, even though he looks like he's armored, he does not. Just all around really good. Also, I think she has a okay base staff rank. And this game has some good staffs. Like I said, the Again staff exists. Warp exists in most difficulties. Rescue staff is really good, but rescue staff, I mean, what rank is rescue again? Is it E in this one too? Yeah, it is E in this one too, so that doesn't really matter that much. But she has C rank staffs, so like physic and stuff is also very useful. Also, she can go Swordmaster and use the 11th sword. Swordmaster has a base C rank in swords, and 11th sword is actually like pretty powerful in this game. Like, I used to think it was like, it's a meme, why would you use it? But in FE11, like 11th sword, yeah, it kind of sucks. It has 6 might, it sucks. But FE12, it has double that might. Actually. Oh, it is 10 might, not double the might. I thought it was 12, it was 10. So 11th sword in this game has 10 might. It's actually like almost like a good tome. Like if you compare it to something like, I don't know, Elfire tome. Elfire has 9 might, 11th sword has 10. So that's pretty nice. 11th swords are like not infinite use, of course, but you wouldn't want her to be a swordmaster in every single chapter, but having a way to actually have fast one-two range with the class with just more durability because you don't get doubled is pretty nice as well. So Swordmaster Katarina is something you shouldn't sleep on if you don't need to staff utility and instead you want some more attack speed. So I think she's really good. It's just, I think if you rated her lower, it would be on the basis of lower availability. Next up is Board, another C-rank Axis bot for the early game. This is another example of a unit that I think would be somewhat viable in Shadow Dragon just on the basis of weapon ranks and not much else. But in this game, you can't get by with just good weapon ranks. You also really need some good stats, and Board does not have good stats. I think in particular, even in this game, the speed just doesn't hold up very well. He's 6 base speed, 30% growth, so he's a little bit better off than he is in Shadow Dragon, I believe, but still not really worth using. He has 100% HP growth though, which is funny, but his base is actually kind of shit. It's only 22 as a fighter. You could change him into a pirate. For him to be slightly, I think it makes him a little bit faster. Board, class, pirate. Let me see if that makes any sense. Yeah, so if you change him into pirate, he gains +2 base speed, and his speed growth actually goes up to 50%. It's a pretty massive difference. But I don't know if it's enough to keep up with the enemy attack speed, because the base still isn't spectacular. But it looks a lot better than I thought it would at first, actually. I thought of Board as like a super slow unit, but as a pirate, it's actually not terrible. The problem is, though, you sacrifice like 4 HP for it. Everything else looks pretty similar to Fighter, so that might be the most viable build for him. I feel like for him, you probably want to go Berserker or Draco Knight, kind of like with Barst. But he's definitely, I think, a tier and maybe even 2 tiers below Barst. I'm gonna put him like the bottom of D, I guess. I could see some spots in your game where board using a hammer on someone can be nice. That might even be better than Caesar. I don't even know why Caesar is like higher than... Oh, I guess Nina literally does one thing in the whole run. If you train Caesar, she's better than that, but I could see it like being reversed. The reason I'm like doing this is because I kind of want board to be over Caesar, but I'm not sure about Nina. I'll just do it like this for now. This seems okay. But board is not super viable, but you know, at least you can use a hammer. Bantu, probably one of the worst units of all time. I'm just gonna like put him on his own in F tier because Bantu, you cannot reclass, but unlike the Zayn, he doesn't have a good copy ability. He just kind of sucks on his own. Bantu has like, when weighing a set, you gotta take into account the Dragonstone, but I don't think that really helps him very much. So let me look at his bases. They're kind of similar to Shadow Dragon from what I remember. Firestone is what it's called. So effectively Bantu has 2 base strength, and then the Dragonstone gives +8 strength, and it gives 15 might. So effectively, Bantu has actually a pretty decent base might. It's about 25. It's not enough for one-hit KOs, unfortunately. The thresholds for that are a little bit higher. And then speed-wise, he only has 4 base speed, and I think he gets +4 from the Firestone as well, from what I can see. There's like 8. It actually sounds like in some games it would actually hold up, I think, but I don't think it really does for this game. I think Bantu is like the ultimate Soyo unit, the ultimate screw your opponent over unit, where in certain kind of drafts you pick units for other people. And I think in such a draft, Bantu would be the first pick because he's just such a pain to use. I think he's meant to be some sort of tank. His base defense would be like, I think it's 12 with the Dragonstone. I'm actually surprised at how low that is, because his personal base is like 3. And the defense, like, the defense bonus from the Firestone makes it go up to +12. But I think also the fact that the Dragonstone doesn't give HP might be the biggest hurt to his tankiness, because he has 18 base HP, which is just nothing. So any enemy that can do 9 damage or over at base level is just going to crush him, which I think is most enemies. So this might be the least viable unit in the whole game. And for most units, like, let's take Mathis again, that's my favorite unit example. If you can get Mathis to level 10, at the very least you can make him into a sniper, and then he can like provide chip at range, which he would be doing it worse than everyone else, but it'd be doing something and it'd be remotely helpful. Like if you put a gun to someone's head and made him use Mathis, he'd find a way to maybe help out. There's no such solution for Bantu. He doesn't have 2 range, not even in Lunatic mode where all the enemy dragons do, so he can't provide free chips, so every battle he does is just exposing himself. I'm trying to see what his hit rate is like. Firestone only has 85 hits, but he only has 3 skill. So I think he wouldn't even have perfect hit on enemies. I think, yeah, I think Bantu pretty bad. Okay, let's head on to the next one, because there's just not much to say about Bantu. He's just gross. So Tiki, this is some unit I kind of need to test to make sure, because there can be some kind of tricky things. I remember talking with Don about Nagi, and Nagi has just enough strength to where on sim difficulties, I think like hard 1 and normal mode, she can one-shot enemy dragons in the last couple chapters, and that's where Nagi joins, so that's why it's relevant. And Tiki joins with like only a couple points less strength than Nagi. I'm gonna double check that. Yeah, so Tiki only has 6 base strength, while Nagi has 8, and Tiki has a 50% strength growth as a Manakite. She can't reclass. So if you were to give Tiki a couple of levels, she could reasonably have the same strength as Nagi at base, and potentially be viable for one-shotting enemy dragons in lower difficulties. On higher difficulties, I can see it just not working out, period, because there you just won't have the firepower to do anything against dragons. But I think this is the main draw to Manakite units in FE12, is one-shotting enemy dragons, because I think against everything else, they're just not that great. For the same reasons as Bantu, for surprisingly, she just joins later with, I mean, her Divine Stone's better than Bantu's Firestone. It has 18 might, which is pretty massive. 15 might is good on Firestone, but 18 might is even better. 100 hit, strength +9, so just all around better power at base. What's the big draw? I guess like same speed bonus actually as Bantu's Firestone. Like Firestone gives 4, putting Bantu up to a base of 8. Tiki has a base speed of 6, so she goes up to 10. I guess they will both get doubled by the time Tiki joins, because when Tiki joins, like most enemies are stronger, so I guess the speed gap isn't very big. I can see why, because I was discussing Tiki with a couple of other people, and I think Skryza was like, hey, Tiki is like Bantu tier. And I wasn't sure about that. I feel like Tiki is like not Bantu tier, but she might just be an E tier in this game. I'm actually like not completely sure. I think I put her like much higher in previous like Maneki tier lists and stuff, Dragon tier lists, but I'm not even sure if she's like that much better than everyone else here. I'm gonna put her at the, like the top of E, because of the the potential to one shot in like hard 1 on enemy Manekits, and that's about where it ends. I think she's much better than Shadow Dragon Tiki. Next up is Beck. I wish she was still a ballistician in this game, but they just kind of said, okay, we're out of ballistician oil or whatever it was, so we're no longer doing ballisticians in this game. But they made Beck come back anyway, and now he's just a shitty unit with shitty bases. A horseman. It doesn't really matter what he is at base. I guess it matters for his weapon ranks. I think he has some level of bow rank. He actually has Bibos and sea swords. I guess that technically allows him to use the Worm Slayer, but his speed benchmark is just not there. I'm gonna check what he is like as a sword master just for fun. Class Swordmaster. He has 14 base speed as a horseman, 19 as a Swordmaster. I think that's short of like all the doubling benchmarks you would ever want to hit. And the growths are not spectacular enough to really make up for it. Like, sure, he has 70% speed growth as a Swordmaster, but he's not gonna outspeed enemies by enough to double them reliably, even as that. And that's like his best shot at doubling. I guess he could be a sniper and at least profit from effective damage that way. I think he'd actually be like more length than doubled still as a sniper because he's 15 speed, so that's not great here. He does have like he is 15 shots away from using Parthia though. He has B bows and then 45 weapon XP out of 60, so he could potentially reach A bows. I guess that's something. So I guess that puts him like roughly where I put Tomas or something, like able. I feel like that's like able level performance at best. Put him around here. I think Beck is like an example of a unit that's like, I'm gonna put him like where Dolph is, I guess. A little worse than Dolph maybe. The point is, I think Beck is like a good example of like the free silver tier. What people would do is like just all these mid and late game units in FE12 that just join and you just take their silver weapons, put them in convoy and just bench them. That's what I feel like Beck is in FE12. It's very sad what happened to him after Shadow Dragon, because in Shadow Dragon, I think he's like a top 5 unit in the game, or at the very least, one of the best units to deploy for like the rest of the game once he joins, kind of like Zayn and Katarina. And now he's down here, and like I feel like he's even lucky to be a D tier. I'm gonna look at these personal bases for 1 second, because like I want to find something that redeems him a little bit. Personal, like how does he compare to? Let's see. I'm pretty sure Dice and Marilys joined like a little bit before him, so we can do like Dice. What does he look like? What does his personal bases look like compared to Dice? Okay, they're a little bit better, but like a little bit, and not even all around. His strength is actually worse than Dice's, for example, at base. His speed is like 1 higher. That's not a very good sign. I feel like this is the right place for him. I'm gonna compare it to Dolph real quick, although Dolph joins a lot later. But if bases are worse, let's see. Beck is sort of on par with Dolph. Actually better in some stats, worse in others. Not like it's like 1 or 2 points difference in most stats. I'll just put Beck over Dolph for now, I guess. Maybe Dice is actually better than both. It's like such a small difference, but these kind of things like fascinate me sometimes. But yeah, we'll just put him at the top of D for now. Draug, actually sort of interesting, these reclassing games. I've said it 100 times before, but Armor Knights, the way that class bases and personal bases work, because they didn't want to give him like 0 base speed, they had to be given some base speed, but then the Armor Knight base is just super low. So Draug ends up with a pretty high personal base speed. Let me see what it is in this game in particular. Yeah, so Draug as an Armor Knight has 5 base speed, but the personal base he's at is also 5, because Armor Knight just has a 0 base speed in this game. So that means that when you reclass a Draug to something else, like if you make him a mercenary or something, class mercenary, he's gonna have really high speed. He actually has 14 base speed as a mercenary, and if you get some levels in prologue, like if you were to use Draug full time, you might want to pick him in prologue, then he becomes really, really fast. The drawback of Draug is, of course, that the same thing applies to his HP and defense. The Armor Knight class has really high base defense, and Draug, they didn't want to give him too much defense, so he has 11 base defense, but that's just the Armor Knight base, so he actually has 0 base defense. So he is surprisingly fragile. For the purpose of the tier list, where we just assume that people are freely reclassing, that means that Draug is a fragile unit, as weird as it is, which I think it's always weird when you look at his supports, for example, where Chris praises him for being this invincible madman that ended up like taking like 5,000 hits to his armor and just not dying. And then you look at his in-game base and you're like, oh, 0 base defense, 5 base speed. That makes sense. But yeah, I don't think you should ever keep Draug as an Armor Knight. Like the very first chapter in the main game just has a bunch of barbarians, so it makes sense to make him like a hunter or a mercenary instead. Maybe a myrmidon, but I think mercenary makes more sense. I have memories of Drow getting one-shot even in FE12. I don't remember exactly what it takes for him to get one-shot. The Barbarians have like Silver Axes in like Heart 3, for example. Not sure about Heart 2. There might be configurations where he survives with like an Angelic Robe or a Rainbow Potion or just lower difficulties in general. But I do know Jog is great for baiting enemies towards him because he ends up on such low HP they can do so much damage to him. And I think his luck is also low enough to where enemies will sometimes have crit on him and want to attack him. His base luck is 3, so I would not be surprised. So on a higher difficulty, sometimes you want to like AI manipulate to make sure that enemies cannot gang up on you. You put Jog technically in range of 3 enemies, but you put him in such a way that when one attacks him, there's no more space for the other 3. And that way your other units will have an easier time surviving the remaining enemies. It's a great thing that Drow can do in the early game that I've made use of before. And then also, you have to hope for Drow that he doesn't suffer from success by like critting enemies. I don't think he one-rounds enemies at base level on higher difficulties. I think he puts them up pretty low because he can double. But if he like were to one-round someone or crit them, he'd be open for another attack and then he would die because he's so fragile. I know it's weird, but that's how Drow is. As an Armor Knight, I don't think he will get anywhere. Like if you want any idea of how Drow does as an Armor Knight, just look at FE3 or FE1 where I put him in like bottom tiers. But as a training unit, I think he's alright. You do have to start from scratch with his weapon rank in classes like Mercenary and Hunter, but I think it's worth it for him overall. If you're doing like Hunter, for example, you can make use of the Forge Bow that you almost always want to make in like Chapter 2 to shoot down Draco Knights. Forged weaponry is... Forged effective weaponry is always super nice in FE11 and FE12, and being able to fight Draco Knights with the high speed that Draug has and the high strength that he also can get is pretty nice. I'd say he's like a little better than units like Ogma, Kane, Barst and friends. I don't know exactly how much better. I do think he's better than Cecil. You could argue maybe he's even B-. I know about Minerva because Minerva is like more low maintenance. So you could argue he's like better or worse than Minerva or Sita. I feel like Sita's more versatile overall, has better prologue utility, so I kind of want to keep him below Sita. Also, like the main drawback of Sita is like being fragile, but I don't think you can think Sita as more or less fragile than Draug. I don't think there's much of a difference between them in that regard. So yeah, Draug does have the middle class sets though, so he's like more options. I feel like the best final class for him would probably be Horseman, or maybe like reclassing between classes like Hunter and Horseman, or Horseman, Swordmaster, Sniper maybe, like whatever you build his ranks in and whatever will make him work. I forgot, Pirate Fighter, also pretty good classes for Draug. You can also double in those and do a massive amount of damage. That's when I think you can actually start one-running enemies, which you have to be a bit careful with, but it can be useful in small quantities. I think I actually used Pirate Draug a fair bit. I do think you kind of have to commit to whatever you want to make him in the long term fairly early on because you're starting from E ranks. So weapon gain is not super fast in FE11, like grinding weapon ranks is not very fast in FE11, FE12. You gain like 2 per round of combat regardless of whether you kill or double or anything. So it doesn't take that much to get from E to D, but it is a bit of a pain in the butt and you don't want to do it all over again just because you're doing a different class. So you want to be wary of what you're making him in the long term, I think. And that goes for someone like Luke as well. But Luke has like some starting sword rank, I think, or can build some sword rank in prologue. So for him, it's a little bit easier. But Draug has a bit more trouble. But that's the harder bit about raising units that start from like scratch with weapon ranks. Estes is almost like the same unit she's always been, you know, a late game joiner with like bad bases but good growths. I want to see if her growths are significantly worse or better than everyone else. Because, as I said, everyone else has really good growth in this game, so just joining late with good growth does not guarantee you a high position. I mean, it never has, but especially in this game, you really need to stand out because, like, if you look at Draug, for example, as a mercenary, he has 70% speed growth, so if S joins with like an 80% speed growth like she does, that doesn't really stand out very much. Now, of course, S has good growth all around. Like, as a Pegasus Knight, she actually has 80 strength, 80 skill, 80 speed, 70 luck. Only 30% defense though, so pretty low, and on her bases are just absolute trash. She can technically join in the prologue for prologue 8s, but I don't think you should ever pick her over Kane. Being weak to bows is just such a hindrance in prologue 8 because there are bow enemies around that can just one-hit KO her, and you definitely don't want that. You can get away with it, especially in easier difficulties, but it's not the recommended choice. So by using Est, you lose out on Kane for a chapter, which I think is a significant loss to take into account. And then she just joins late, so even if she were good, she doesn't have that much utility. Her base strength is 6, which is awful. 13 speed is like alright for a level 5 unit, but at the point in the game, these get doubled. And I think she also gets one-shot by everything, with 20 HP and 8 defense. So S is like a technically salvageable unit, but only if you put like a real amount of effort in. So I'm gonna put her like around where Shima and friends are. it's the one of those uses you can make good if you want to, but this is never going to be worth it. But if you do it, you know, it's great for screenshots and meme posts. Castor, early joining bow units, not very impressive in the long term as far as I remember in this game. I think it was better in FE3. I did see some couple comments about his FE3 placement where he should have been put lower. I'm going to see his personal basis real quick. I know he has some good bow rank, which is, you know, if you're going to be a quote-unquote bad unit, at least you might as well have bow rank, right? So you can be good at sniping things. Of course, Sniper always has C rank to work with, but he can be like maybe useful as a horseman, or you can use some higher rank bows, maybe like a silver bow, whereas other units that you would train into, again using Mathis as an example, you might be able to use silver bows where Mathis could not. His growths are actually not as terrible as I remember them being. 50% strength and 50% speed, but this game status is not too high, but I thought it might be worse. But I just remember Castor just never really doubling or doing anything significant. He also joins like after chapter 3, which means he misses out on a bunch of Draconite kills that would make someone like Ryan, for example, who we're going to discuss in a minute, or like Gordon a bit more viable. So he misses out on that. I think Castor's main draw in the older games came from the fact that he was a hunter and he could become a horseman, I guess. Right? He can, right? I think it depends on the game. Yeah, FE3, I think he can become a horseman. FE1, I don't think he can. But that's like the main way to differentiate him from units like Gordon, Ryan, any other person that's like an archer / sniper. But in this game, they can interchangeably reclass, so as long as you have the slots for it, you can make anyone a sniper or horseman. So that exclusivity kind of fades away, and you're left with a unit with Castor's honestly unimpressive bases. I don't know if he's bad enough for an E tier. I'll probably just put him at the bottom of D, but just on like availability and sort of trainability alone. But I could see him being an E2. I don't have a really big preference on Castor. Then we have Ryan, who actually has a lot of prologue utility. There was a time where me, with my almost complete lack of FE12 experience, thought, hey, Ryan is kind of good, right? Because I think I read some like playthrough threads where people were discussing like their progress. They would just make like a forum thread on like Serenus Forest and just be like, okay, I'm playing through New Mystery, let's go. And I just put all their unit levels and experiences and stats in a little table and discuss how they beat every chapter. And I'm pretty sure I read one where some person was using Ryan, and that just gave me the expression that Ryan was like, all right, you can use Luke and Ryan in a playthrough and they'll be pretty okay because it's New Mystery. And I think Ryan's growths are also kind of alright. I mean, yeah, 80% skill. Okay, I guess skill is not too relevant. 50% strength, 50% speed, like I said with Castor. But this game standard's not that good, but it seems alright on paper, so probably viable. Later, I kind of learned through playing and talking to other people that Ryan actually wasn't considered that good, and I can definitely see why. Whenever I play FE12 Prologue, I always find that it's somewhat easy to raise Luke because it just kind of ends up getting kills. It just ends up being the optimal way to play. Because the way it generally goes, there's like an enemy phase. Just almost any Prologue chapter kind of goes like this for me. There's like an enemy phase. Chris weakens a bunch of enemies for me by fighting. And then you need people to mop them up. And you can use someone like Luke to finish one of them off almost without any kind of penalty, without any real opportunity cost, because the enemies are just there and you need someone to kill them. If Luke doesn't do it, then no one is going to do it. They just end up taking more damage on enemy phase, so you might as well. Ryan can kind of do the same, but with Ryan, you almost kind of want him to attack enemies that are at full HP, so you can finish them off with someone else that's like stronger. You want him to attack and weaken enemies without taking a counter. This is good utility because it's the best way to prevent yourself from taking damage, but it ends up costing Ryan himself a lot of EXP. So it's better for the team overall, but it sucks for Ryan in Prologue. That's kind of how the first couple of Prologue chapters with Ryan go. At some point you get more units than you have deployment slots, so you start to have bench units, and Ryan's bases are just so bad because of the archer bases that he has. There's a couple enemies that can double him. I think particularly the bigger problem for him is being doubled by hunters. The ones in like Merrick's chapter, Prologue 5, I think they are like borderline doubling Ryan. I think sometimes people will raise Ryan with like one level just to make sure he has some speed for going for him. Because if he gets doubled by those, he's just completely worthless. And the chapter's on where you just keep getting more and more units, and there's just no good reason to justify deploying Ryan anymore. And after that, the Prologue is over, everyone can reclass, and he can become a hunter, I guess, and be like sort of okay. But another big problem about Prologue for him in high difficulties, I think, is you can really only afford to raise a couple units in Prologue and feed them XP. You need Chris to become really good. You need some XP on CDAP probably for Prologue 8, and you need to train Marth in Prologue 8. You might want to train some other units like maybe Ogmar or something, but generally that's about it. But the more XP you can give to one unit that you're really focusing kills into, the better. And the best candidate for that is generally Luke. Rhodey not nearly as good as Lucas, and Ryan also not really that good compared to Luke when he's being given the treatments. Like, there's no real reason to focus our XP into Ryan instead of Luke. And if you spread the XP, you just end up with 2 mediocre units rather than 1 good one. That's kind of the summary of my experience with Ryan as a unit. I'm sure he's sort of viable as a training project, but there's never any reason to, and you just end up with a mediocre-ish sniper. So I think the place he goes is like the upper D tier. Like, I don't really think he's worse than the units that join in the mid game, don't really accomplish anything, or the units that join in like the end game and only accomplish like a couple things in the whole playthrough. But at the same time, I can't really put him over units that I think are better training projects, even though they join later. I'm not sure about that part though. Like Barst versus Ryan, I think might actually be an interesting argument. In some places, it might not be, but that's where I think it's more dubious about whether there's a tier difference or not. But this is where I think I would put him. But maybe he belongs in the bottom of C instead. I'm not entirely sure. I'm just gonna put him here for now. I feel a little bit better about bottom C than the top of D. Now we have Tomas. Tomas was not in the original FE3 book 2. They just kind of put him back in here in New Mystery. They put him in like a village in, I think, the Garage chapter. I have a funny experience with that chapter. I think I was playing my Iron Man on hard 2, and my entire team got wiped in like 1 or 2 maps before that. So I was really desperate for help with just about anything. And that chapter has a lot of enemy Draco Knights that you gotta kill. They were not in the original version, I think, but they are there in the FE12 version, and they're really strong. I was like, oh great, I'll just recruit another sniper. Now my army at that point was actually, and you might remember the stream if you were around for it, I just reclassed like almost all my stupid units into sniper. Like I think I had like units like Abel around, or like Dolph or McCallan or whatever. And they were all just snipers hoping to help out with the team to maybe guide Marth to the throne. I did have Chris, like a really good Chris that could just like, he couldn't really solo a whole like team of enemies, but he could hold them off and do like significant damage over the course of a turn. So having sniper support was kind of helpful actually. And Tomas was like okay in that chapter for fighting, but he couldn't even one-shot a Draco Knight with a silver bow. So unless I gave him like a really strong 4 silver bow, I don't think he can really do anything on his own. It would always just be support, and that's I think the best Tomas gets in FE12. Just a sniper with okay weapon ranks. Like he has Bibos, right? Let me just double check that. I think he has B. Yeah, he has B. So he actually has a worse bow rank than a lot of people you wouldn't even think of as specialized snipers. I talked a lot about like a couple units before that are just like not really snipers, but they can get to Parthia relatively quickly. Generally units that have like 45 out of 60 bow XP at B rank. So for example, Shima, I think, use 8 bows at base if you class as a sniper. So Tomas is actually a worse sniper than Shima is, which I think is kind of funny. Does that make him worse than Shima? I guess maybe it does. Didn't even think about that. That'd be really funny. Let me compare the personal bases just to make it funnier. They are a little different though because Shima is female, so Shima has less options and also slightly different class bases, I think, to work with. Shima personal. Yeah, so Tomas is like significantly less bow experience than Shima, and his stats are, I mean, his base defense is technically higher, and so is his base strength. So maybe he can be argued as better. I don't know if it makes a big difference though. I think they both pretty much get won out by everything. I'll put Tomas over her. I don't know why. If anyone cares about this, let me know in the comments. Very important argument. Rad, I think we can pretty much just put him in the same place where we put Caesar. Maybe we can put him higher because of memes. Maybe that's an option. He joins in chapter 6X at the end of it if you leave him alive, which is sometimes tricky because Rad is kind of fragile, so it can be easy to kill him in an accident, I think. The most reliable way I know of to keep Rad and Caesar alive is just to kill the boss on turn 1 or 2 and just kind of clog up all the choke points to make sure that they can't suicide or kill you. You know, get through a round of combat without either of you dying. But, you know, I mean, he did upgrade from Iron Sword to Steel Sword between Shadow Dragon and New Mystery, I guess. Other than that, there's not much notable about Rad. It's just another unit that they just decided to implement in the game where he wasn't there to begin with. But his bases are pretty trash as far as I remember. I'm gonna look him up to see if they're anything special. Yeah, the only one that's over 2 is HB, and he joins in chapter 6X after like a bunch of other units. It's a pretty easy, honestly, like almost F tier. Is Caesar like much better than that? Because I kind of want to put Caesar lower now. I keep putting people over him, but honestly maybe he should just be a lot lower. Okay, Caesar's stats are like slightly better, so maybe he's okay with being there. I don't know. Maybe Caesar should not be a tier over Norn. I think I'm gonna put these both in E tier actually. I'm gonna put them both in a bit lower. They feel like they shouldn't be here. I think they should be like this, and then put him higher for memes. There we go. Wolf, pretty much same unit as Sedgar in this game. I'm gonna check for differences real quick, and if not, I'll just use my Sedgar positioning to tier him. Same weapon ranks. Wolf has more strength and more speed. Very fair. He's also a higher level, so that makes sense. Higher HP. Yeah, Sedgar in this game is just worse than Wolf. I don't see a single reason why you use Sedgar. His skill growth is higher by 10%. Other than that, all his growths are lower too. Oh, his defense growth is a bit higher. He has 10 more defense growth, but one lower base defense. So if you level them up all the way to 20, he might end up tying Wolf in defense. Very impressive. Yeah, kind of wish he was like Shadow Dragon, where he was actually worth raising. Like, I wish he just kept the meme growth from the Shadow Dragon. That'd be so much funnier. But instead, we're left with Sedgar at home, or rather, we're left with wait, which is the better one? Okay, never mind. Wolf is the better one between them, so I should put Wolf higher than Sedgar. There we go. It's not Sedgar at home. Sedgar is Wolf at home in this game. Interesting. Kind of cool. Okay, yeah. Wolf better than Sedgar because their bases are just better all around. Like, all around. Wendell, finally. Actually good in this game. Maybe not as good as he is in Shadow Dragon. I don't think he ends up in, like, S tier or maybe not even A tier. But I do like his utility. Maybe B+ tier. I like to compare him to Etzel sometimes. I think Etzel's more bulky. I think Wendell has like almost no HP to speak of. They can both become each other's classes in this game, like Sorcerer and Sage, so we should look at personal stats more than anything. Etzel personal. They join like kind of far apart, but have similar utilities, right? So Wendell joins earlier with the same staff rank as Etzel, so he's better in that regard. They have the same tome rank as well, so they can both spam Excalibur, which is great. Their growths are obviously trash. Wendell's growth especially are trash. Like, this person's like in the 10s and 20s. So growth-wise, there's not much of a reason to expect anything out of either of the two. I think it's more about their bases and what they do. Wendell has a 1 higher speed base, but significantly less bulk from what I can see. He has 4 less HP and 4 less defense. It's going to close a little bit over the course of the chapters that they join in, because Wendell joins at the end of 6, so like in 7 basically, or 6x. I think he's around for 6x. Yeah, I think he is. And then Etzel joins in like, I think 11 or so. So there's some time for Wendell to grow, but he doesn't grow very fast because he's level 7 like Sage at base. So generally I think you can just rely on their base and just compare those. And again, Etzel is more bulky. I think Wendell can survive some enemies, especially with the help of Rainbow Potion or something, to maybe survive a Flying Dragon, Excalibur them back in the face, whereas Etzel doesn't really need the investment for that. Does Etzel have the speed to not get doubled? Just let me check his bases. He has 12 speed, so it takes 16 speed to double him, which at least in some difficulties will not get him doubled. When on the other hand, he has 13 base speed as a Sage. What is it? What if he's a Sorcerer? He has 13 speed as a Sorcerer, so slightly higher chance to not get doubled. But it does take 32 attack to one-shot him as a Sorcerer, whereas for Etzel it would take like 40 attack to one-shot him. I'm pretty sure there's like chances for Wendell to get one shot sometimes. I don't see a really big difference for like reasons for him to be like an entire tier difference. Just a matter of which you think is better. Wendell being around for like 4 or 5 more chapters does seem kind of good to me, so I'm kind of tempted to put him like this. But after Etzel has joined, I'm pretty sure he's the better one, just to make that clear. But availability, I think, weighs a little bit heavier, especially when your utility is so good, because he's a pre-promote. Pre-promote is nice. You can also still do like Draco Pope if you like that stuff. I think that might be helpful in his joining chapter in chapter 7, where you gotta catch the thieves before they run away. Nafar can't really take care of all of them because he doesn't have the health to do it. So that might be wise, but most of the time I think he wants to be Sorcerer, Sage, Bishop for staff rank, and just provide staff utility like Physic, later on again staff. I like Physic personally. I'm trying to think of like what else I usually use. I guess Thief Staff and stuff like that, Rescue, those kind of things. Healing, just recover, mend. All those things are very, very helpful in FE12 in general, so I don't think I need to be super elaborate on that. And then the main tome to use is just Excalibur against Flyers, and then some random other tomes, depending on the situation. Well, I almost thought it was done, but then I realized Samson had dropped off the face of the earth between recordings. This is a problem with the tier list maker. It sometimes just doesn't load the last character on it, so between takes, or rather between 2 sessions with a pause in between, Samson just kind of vanished, and I almost forgot about him until I was editing. But no worries, he's here. Zelda, I didn't forget your character. Samson is another character that I don't believe was playable in the original FE3, but I'm not quite sure on that. But either way, I think as Shadow Dragon he's better overall because there's axe rank comes in handy a lot more, and there's more of a demand for fillers that have high rep ranks but perhaps not amazing stats. His stats in Shadow Dragon are okay, but not spectacular to the point where you can do a lot of stuff. It just doesn't get doubled on account of okay base speed along with the hero class. FE12 when reclassing is even more free than it was in Shadow Dragon, and when stat benchmarks are more demanding, and there are more powerful late game characters, either through, mostly through training through the early game with higher growths. It's hard to really find a niche for Samson, I found. I remember Don used him one time in his 0% growth playthrough, and that should be where he peaks because he's more about bases than about leveling up really well. I think he like distracted a couple of enemies by having higher priority through like lower luck or something in the chapter with all the ballistas, and the one where you had to visit the village with the king in it to get one of the spheres with Marth, like the map where you meet the wolf guard for the first time. That's the one where he was used, and that was about it. And that's like all the things I've seen anyone ever do with Samson, because no one really uses this guy. This is not a game where you have to choose between him and Aaron, but nonetheless he finds less use in this game than in the previous game. Probably partially because, you know, in Shadow Dragon, Aaron was the much inferior choice to Samson. But yeah, Samson not very notable for anything else. He does have like a really high axe rank. He has B rank as a hero, which, I mean, I do think I believe that as a warrior he might have insanely good axe rank. Like, let's say you make him berserker or warrior. Yeah, so he's like halfway through B in that case. Still like pretty far away just from A, just to be able to use the Hot Glare, and probably not even the best users of it. But that's the kind of direction I would look into if you were to like use Samson. But like 17 base strength as a berserker and 16 base speed. At that point in the game, that's like chapter 19, I think, from the top of my head. Or chapter 18 probably. Yeah, I think chapter 18 sounds about right. You need like way higher benchmarks to double anything. I think you might even still get doubled by some enemy types if they're really good. So yeah, not a big fan of Samson in this game. I think the highest I can do for him is like C and perhaps even D. I do feel like the characters here are quite a bit better, so I think I'm gonna have to put him like near the top of D. Axe rank is pretty good. Lance rank is pretty good too, which is what he has. I'm gonna avoid his name because I'm not sure if it's Dole from a sound at this point. I'm gonna put him around here, maybe a little lower. Let me compare his bases to Abel's real quick because he doesn't join that far apart. So his bases are remarkably similar to Abel. Abel joins earlier with a slightly higher speed, 2 less strength, 1 more speed, same HP, same defense, so practically indistinguishable. Since Abel joins earlier, I guess we'll have to hand it to Abel here. Mikalos might be better because his bases are actually good, although he is a little weird like that. I'll just leave him here for now. This is roughly where I think I would put him. So, that is actually the last character. Alright, yeah, there we go. There's the FE12 units. As I said before, this is just a sketch of my experiences and knowledge, which is limited by the playthroughs I've watched and seen. Let me know what you think about my tierings. If there's any grave errors I have made, I'm sure I have made a couple. Let me know, and they'll be taken into account for revisions. I'll gladly invite someone on that's knowledgeable about the game to fix this list once it's complete. Which is not, it's not nearly complete yet. I think we have like half the quest left still to do. A lot of familiar faces are still left to do. But from here on out, the big tier list is going to continue like it did before with, you know, asking my Patreons, you know, which unit do you want me to tier, and I'll just pick, I'll sort them in videos based on the games that they're picked. A couple of games have already been completed, like FE5 and Radiant Dawn is complete. I think FE4, at least one of the gens is already complete. So those will be out, but there's a very good spreadsheet that keeps track of which units have been submitted and which have not, and I also have my own spreadsheet you can take a look at if you want to make sure. Thanks again for all my Patreons for supporting all the characters. Thanks everyone for watching if you enjoyed watching these or listening to them in the background, and I hope you have a good day. Peace around. Goodbye.